All right. Good morning, good afternoon, hello, wherever you're dialing in from. Thank you so very much for taking the time to join our webinar on CSRD for Wave 1 and 2 companies. We're going to wait a couple minutes and give registrants chance to filter in from wherever the meetings they might be joining us from. In the meantime, though, we do have a quick poll that's going to pop up on your screen. We're quite curious to know, what are your webinar beverage essentials? I guess it might depend on what time of day it is, wherever you're dialing in from. Personally, I am a coffee drinker. Diksha, Alicia, Gemma, do you have any preferences?
I would go with water
I
just
have
to be
both.
safe.
Coffee and water.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, it's always a good option. Sometimes I don't like that aftertaste with the coffee, and you have to have both. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Well equipped.
So feel free to use the poll that you're seeing on screen to fill out your answer. It's also a nice little test because we're going to have a couple interactive questions throughout the webinar where we're going to ask you to post some of your answers. So feel free to use the current poll as a quick test. Kate, what sort of results do we have coming in so far while we wait for people to join? Okay. Yeah, as expected. Coffee, I imagine sustainability professionals need that little caffeine kick to get through the workday, especially given how intense sustainability reporting could be and how demanding it can be. So I can see most of them, almost half the audience, needing coffee. All right, so we'll just wait about 1 minute or so before we get going. I see people filtering in. Just a few more seconds. All right, I think we can get going. So hello again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're dialing in from around the world. Thank you so very much for taking the time to join our webinar on CSRD for Wave 1 and 2 companies. We have three fantastic presenters who are going to walk you through what I consider a very exciting deck. I've had the privilege of seeing the deck and the content before. I know the topic itself can be very heavy, but what we want to do is we want to simplify some of the expectations around CSRD, talk a little bit about what's confirmed within the upcoming reporting cycle, what's changed, and what you as a sustainability professional who's probably still trying to wrap your head around the requirements of CSRD, what you can actually do now to help with preparing your report. So joining me to deliver this presentation, we have Alicia Derry, who is an ESG manager here at Novisto. We have Diksha Rao Sahib, who is a senior ESG analyst. And we have a very, very, very exciting guest from EFRAG. We have Gemma Sanchez Daines, who is technical director within the leadership team at EFRAG. So I'm going to pass to Diksha to kick us off. Just as a reminder to all of those who are listening in, this webinar is being recorded. We are going to circulate the recording after, so if you miss something, you can always catch up later on. I invite you to drop your questions throughout the webinar within the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom login. We're going to have dedicated Q&A time at the end. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to have a few interactive questions pop up on your screen where we'll invite you to vote throughout the session, and then we'll be discussing some of the results live. So thank you so much again for joining in. Diksha, I'll pass to you.
Thank you so much, Rajiv. Trying to put an agenda to today's conversation, we would take a step back and look a bit of the background as to what has happened so far, where we stand today, and what to focus on moving on. At this point, I would like to understand a little bit on the mix of the audience today, and we have our first poll coming up to understand where you are in your CSRD journey. Have you already begun your report? Are you in preparation for your first report? Are you understanding how to start your preparations? Just to understand what kind of audience we have today. So where do you see yourself amongst these different options? Please take a moment to let us know. Very curious to see what kind of results we get, and what we hope to have in our discussion today. Okay, so that's a fair mix of people who have already published their first CSRD report, currently preparing to publish one, and not yet started, while we have majority in the early preparations stage. Fantastic. So, talking a little bit on the journey that we have come so far, what does it mean? Where does it start? So, let's go back to 2023, where the journey began. The CSRD directive, which introduced a gradual implementation that had wave 1 to 4 reporting starting fiscal year 2024 onwards. We also saw that this required implementation into national laws, which many member states have already done. From there, we went on to have the ESRS standards themselves that was prepared by EFRAG on behalf of the EC, which was the delegated regulation since Jan 2024. Post this, we came to the omnibus simplifications, where we saw the stop the clock directive taken over in April 2025, which meant the postponement of regulations by 2 years. Now, this also had to be implemented into national laws, and we see many member states already have completed that action. Then came the quick fix regulation, which gave much more benefit to the wave one companies that had already started their reporting for fiscal year 2024. This meant no additional information for the fiscal year 25 and 26, and also extension of the phase-in reliefs that were originally provided only for companies with up to 750 employees. So currently, with all these in place, today we have the Omnibus Directive that received green signal from the EU Council. So this is hot from the press, just from a couple hours ago. And in the final, in the coming days, we can expect the official publication in the journal. And with that, we also now have near final into the simplified ESRS itself, that we look forward to in the coming weeks and months. So with all of these coming into picture, then we try to understand where we are going, and how these have impacted and influenced the journey of the different companies. The Omnibus Directive, that is the scope.
Yep. I'll jump in here. So we're separating it out into really, what is the scope of the reporting we're talking about, and then what is the context. So when we talk about the Omnibus Directive, this is really the scope of it. So this is around the thresholds and the timelines. Giving a quick overview. Also, you'll notice the change of terminology from, wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, to rather companies that are already reporting, so formally wave 1, and then basically everybody else is companies, if they're falling in scope, then they're preparing for reporting. And so the wave terminology is no longer really necessarily relevant with this new thresholds and timelines. So you have, companies reporting since fiscal year 2024. These are listed EU companies greater than 500 employees. Then you have the companies that are preparing to report. So this is fiscal year 2027, reports due in 2028. And this is where, as I'm sure many of you are aware, there's a big change in threshold, right? So greater than 1,000 employees and greater than 450 million euro revenue to be falling into this category. And the standards that will be followed to be the simplified ESRS. Then as a third bucket, you have those reporting in 2029 on fiscal year 2028. So this is for all the non-EU companies which satisfy the two criteria, greater than 200 million euro revenue, EU subsidiary or branch, and greater than 450 million group revenue in the EU. And these will be following what is being drafted as the equivalent standards, non-EU ESRS or the simplified standard. You also have, these wave one companies, the formerly wave one companies, right, that will fall out of scope. And so they have the choice to basically continue to report on a voluntary basis, or others will simply transition to the simplified ESRS. So with that, we would love to have another poll actually to understand with this, when will your organization be in scope for the CSRD? So based on these revised thresholds and timelines from the Omnibus, looking to hear, what the audience is made up for. I mean, I think from the preparation question, we have a little bit of an idea, right? We can see who's who, but this will just give an even clearer picture on how to steer the conversation as well today. I'll just give it a moment for anyone to vote. All right. Okay. Again, so like majority preparing for that 2027 fiscal year reporting, but a pretty good breakdown between the different categories. I mean, for those of you, 2027, 2028, you're in a really great spot now. You've got time to start your preparation, your gap analysis, your software selection, build that, reasonable assurance ready system. So that is just, you're in good timing. And then those that have already been reporting, I mean, definitely take a look at the quick fix, see how to ease your reporting as we go. So, Gemma, looking at our timelines and the poll results, there's clear regulatory imperative to meet, right, these milestones. I think that it could be tempted to treat it, just as a race to compliance, but I would love to pick your brain on it, Gemma. Do you think that most companies are approaching CSRD as a compliance exercise, or some also as a transformation exercise? And what risk does each mindset create?
Hi, Alicia, thanks for that. Maybe before I answer the question, just to make sure that we are on the same page. So for the non-EU companies, the standard would be a non-EU standard. It would not be the simplified ESRS. It's true that obviously the non-EU standard, so there's no optionality. The non-EU standard would be based on the revised ESRS, as we call it. Going back to your question, I think it's quite an interesting one. The CSRD is ex ante, a disclosure regime, so it's not a valuation regime. However, the reason why we have the CSRD in Europe and the genesis of that is that in order to actually move the capitals to greener activities, to actually convert the EU economy into a green economy and also social justice for the people, we needed a set of standardized information that companies would have to report in the public. And why is that? Because investors wanted to have the ability to compare company A and company B before deciding where to actually put their capital. And this is important because our premise here has always been that sustainability information is pre-financial information. What do I mean by that? That investors want to know what the strategy of the company would be in the long term. What will be the stranded assets? How, if you are an energy company, you're going to deal with transition, but not only transition in terms of decarbonization pathway, but also just transition for the workers that actually, or employees that the company is employing. So investors want to know these long-term pieces of information so they could actually factor that into their valuations, into their cash flow models. So going back to the question, why is it important? Well, it's important because at the end of the day, each company will take a picture at the end of the year, a picture that requires information on the strategy, which will include sustainability. There is no such a thing as sustainability strategy from our view, climate and social metrics. And this picture will be public. So competitors will look at it, investors will look at it, And if you treat that potentially as a compliance exercise, it wouldn't actually tell the full story. So is it transformational? Is it compliance? I think it's in the middle. For me, transformational, it's going to be, and maybe because of my previous life, it's a big, SAP, transformational process whereby you're actually upgrading your IT software and you have a new set of processes and controls. I'm not sure whether I would go that far, but clearly it's important. It's beyond compliance because it's your opportunity, first time in Europe, to explain your story in sustainability in such a way that one could compare an oil and gas company to a telecoms company. So those companies where climate, for example, they have a differentiating factor in climate, or they treat their people and they have a number of human capital initiatives which are very important, want to report that story because it makes them different. So it makes them different to the outside world. That's why I think it's in between the compliance and transformational, Alicia.
Yeah, wonderful. I think it's always so important as well to go back as you did to the why. You can get so lost in like the process and, in this case, the long regulatory process and all of the hurdles that everybody's just going through to, but really remembering like why was this first put in place can help also companies know and give them kind of strategy on the how that they do it. And as well, I'm loving the notion that you said to separate to no longer say sustainability strategy, but it's strategy point at the end of the day. So I think that that's a great takeaway. Wonderful.
While we looked at the revised scope and timelines of implementation, what the content is the simplified ESRS. While the simplification is there, the foundation remains the same. What we mean by that is DMA is still the first step, although there are a bit more flexibility and focus on IROs. ESRS is still containing 2 cross-cutting standards and have 10 topical standards across ES and G. The boundary is still own operations and value chain. Of course, there are some reduced burden on actual data from value chain here. We still see the 4 reporting areas being governance, strategy, IRO management, and metrics and targets. So that remains the same. The ESRS report is still part of the annual financial report. So the sustainability statements are still part of the financial report that the company publishes. And the focus on connectivity is still the same. So these are some of the foundational aspects or elements that we see carried on from the original ESRS. Now, what this means in terms of quantifying, like if we have to quantify the actual simplification exercise, we see a 61% reduction in the mandatory data points, which means there's consistent reduction across all standards. This was from the elimination of some of the data points that were a repetition between the general disclosure ESRS 2 and the other topical standards. With this, we see about 314 mandatory data points, which are, of course, subject to the materiality filter. So based on your DMA, this may reduce depending on how many IROs are material to your company. Finally, the reduction or removal of all the voluntary data points. So it's 100%, there are no voluntary data points anymore in the simplified ESRS. So I'll let Alicia now go through how these may have impacted in your journey.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So again, we'll be looking a little bit at some of the key changes within the simplified ESRS. Of course, the goal today is to not do an exhaustive list of all of them. There are, a lot of changes, but these are some of the main ones that we think would be relevant to our audience, and want to make sure that everybody is definitely aware of these. So the double materiality, as Diksha mentioned, it's still mandatory It's a little bit more flexible as to when updates are required. So now an annual update is only when required when there's a significant change to the business, as well as companies can now follow a top-down approach for double materiality. So focusing first on the business model rather than only being able to start from that bottom-up exhaustive list of every potential impact. So that's something that's new. Improved understandability is a big one. So this was a large goal, I think, of the Simplified ESRS. So separation of the mandatory data points from guidance and methodology. So that's, and originally they were often mixed together, the methodology and disclosures, and maybe it made it hard to know when you needed to disclose and when it was just advice. So that shall disclose is now in the main text, and it must be reported. And then the shall consider is in the methodology, which is in the application requirements. So that second point, application requirements, were moved directly to the corresponding disclosure requirements. And then last on this slide is changing the minimum disclosure requirements for the policy actions and targets. They've now been renamed to general disclosure requirements, and they're sitting in ESRS 2. So they've been condensed, duplication has been avoided across the topical standards, and it's really that you follow one clear set of rules for any material topic. How we can go. Yeah, perfect. So flexible disaggregation is another one. So this is giving the reporting companies the flexibility to decide on the level of granularity on which they want to report on. So disaggregating on a topic level, a subtopic, group of IROs based on your managerial approach to these topics. Something else, there's no longer sector-specific standards being created. So these were removed. Instead, it's really shifting to have entity-specific metrics. So these are metrics that are specific to your company, to your entity, to your business, that are either coming from other standards, SASB, GRI, or they can be, KPIs and points developed by the companies. So things that are really specific to you. And then lastly here is around the anticipated financial effects. So there's been increased flexibility on the disclosure of this. So now qualitative disclosure is permitted when the effects are not separately identifiable, or the level of uncertainty is so high that the information would not be useful. So it's giving the reporters the opportunity to talk about the trend and the scale without needing to provide a specific euro amount if that's not going to be a good number, if it's not going to be a precise calculated number. So some other notable changes. So, those are some key ones. These are some other ones that we think are still noteworthy. So there's also the value chain cap. So limits CSRD companies' request for value chain data. So this is going to be now according to the VSME standards with fewer than 1,000 employees as the cap. There's no longer a requirement to obtain reasonable assurance. So it's really now going to be for everything limited assurance only. And then XBRL tagging is still in place. It is still necessary, but at the moment it's just delayed because they're still drafting the new XBRL tags for the new simplified ESRS.
Thanks, Alicia. While we did see a lot of changes that were provided from the simplified ESRS, Gemma, I want to understand your insights on how these benefits are expected to, help the companies. So, what may be some of the insights that you have to share today?
Yeah, sure. So for us, it was actually very important to actually seek these benefits. This was actually the mandate from the European Commission that we received about simplification, ensuring that there were flexibilities. We were basically asked to fast forward what we call post-implementation review and standard setting. Right, so you do a post-implementation review of the standards every 3 years. In our case, that's what the CSRD dictates. We did that after 1 year. So that was for us a great occasion to actually ask companies that had already applied the set one. So it was a post-implementation field test, if I was to call it like that.
Yeah.
We did a high number of engagements and outreach events. So to give you some numbers, because we did all these outreach events and stakeholder engagement in 6 months. So we had about 100 outreach events with different stakeholder groups and across different member states. And we did 2 public consultations. And in each public consultation, we had more than 800 respondents. So, I mean, the numbers
incredible.
are, you could compare them with other, international standard setters, and we are at the par, if not, with higher number of participants. So we basically collected a lot of intel. And for us, that was actually quite important. We also have a number of preparers in our governing bodies. So that's the technical group and the SRB, and that was really helpful. But let me be probably concrete here after this overview from your side on the changes. I will probably focus on 3. So the first one is moving to a more principles-based standard setting and less rules-based. So this led to a simplification of our architecture. There's less pages. The interaction between cross-cutting and topical standards, I think, are clear and also reduced. But more importantly, there's been a significant reduction on the granularity and data points. So a good example, for example, is that we had some disclosures on policies, actions, and targets in topical standards. These have been reduced to the minimum, mainly in social, where we have the social lens still in the topical standards, but everything is in ESRS 2 and cross-cutting. Also on certain metrics where we've cut the granularity on breakdowns. But it also means, from a company's perspective, is that if you're moving to principles-based set of rules, then you will need more judgment. You will need to adapt, your disclosures to one's facts and circumstances. And for that, the umbrella of this concept, which is very familiar to us that have been accountants or are chartered accountants, it's the concept of fair presentation. So this is something that, again, by doing principles-based, you are actually giving more responsibilities and flexibilities, right, to the company. The second one is materiality, the materiality assessment simplification. In any standard setting or when it comes to reporting, materiality is the cornerstone. You only disclose what's material. So that filtering and assessment is absolutely critical. We have to remember that in Europe, again, the companies that already reported in 2024 were the biggest ones. So the question after they've invested 2 years on doing materiality assessment is, do they still need, very granular process type of information or steps, or you could go again principle-based. And also remember that we did these IG1 implementation guidance 1 on materiality assessment, which I was driving. So we moved some of the flexibilities from this implementation guidance into the standard. Some of them relate to top-down, others relate to the level of aggregation. So we really hope that companies understand that this is actually not like a tight suit that you have to wear, but one where you actually have the ability to actually use your own language, right? When you're talking about which are the impacts, risks, and opportunities, to the extent that you could actually map them to the mandatory regime, which ESRS is. And then finally, number 3, reliefs and transitional provisions, the magic word. So this is actually an absolute game changer. It's actually the recognition that despite of doing the best efforts, sometimes you cannot get information, or the quality of that information is actually not good enough. So there's a number of reliefs of in terms of the quality of the information, undue cost or efforts, which is very common within financial reporting. And we basically recognize there's still certain maturity that needs to take place when it comes to certain methodologies, for example, including anticipated financial effects. So it's giving companies some leeway, recognizing as well that some of them may need them and some of them may not need them. Some have been reporting sustainability information for 10 years. So, and the users are asking that info. So we are not expecting that everyone will be using these reliefs and transitional provisions, but it helps certainly those starting this journey.
Thank you so much. I see it as a balance. It is giving the flexibility for the customers to tell their story in the way that it makes sense, and also in a way that it helps the investor to interpret and understand and use it for their own decision making. If I may pick your brain on another point here, how does the simplification process or the simplified ESRS relate to the point of interoperability between the other standards and frameworks? What are your thoughts there?
Sure. So, I mean, on the financial materiality side, we've got the IFRS Foundation with the ISSB,
Yeah,
where again they issue standards that are adapted by jurisdictions, right? Canada, Australia.
true.
They could be modified, they could be carved out, as we know in standard setting, and they are based on a principle-based type of methodology. So again, in that regard, you know, we are adapting. We have also embedded explicitly the fair presentation principle, which is core for ISSB, and then the undue cost or effort relief that I was just mentioning. So we are actually probably seeing more alignment even. In the case of GRI, it's slightly different. So GRI, it's a voluntary set of standards in most of the jurisdictions.
Yeah.
It's impact materiality, and it's more rules based than principles based. But it then has this ability or this emissions regime that allow companies not to report, right, and still comply with GRI. In the case of GRI, for example, we noticed that maybe in Europe the uptake has decreased since we have the ESRS mandatory regime. But there's companies that still have certain metrics, 1 or 2, 3, you name it, that they use for management purposes. So they will keep, reporting them under the ESRS on this entity-specific lens, which is compulsory. So I think that there's a different, take maybe on that regard. But again, we don't think that in terms of principles, interoperability has been actually damaged with GRI either. It's just that if we had to cut the data points and some of these disclosures were GRI, they do not exist anymore, right? So that's what happened.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for your input there.
Wonderful. We wanted to, after giving the background and what is happening at the moment, look a little bit more forward facing. So where should we focus now? Where should companies be looking to now? Gemma, I have, a few more questions to keep the discussion going for you. I mean, we've touched on it a little bit, but you've been in the room as these standards were, debated, they were simplified. You've really been there through the whole process, I would say. In your opinion, what may be some of the key learnings to share with our audience today? I think we've touched on it on, little pieces in the other responses, but I would love to hear, if you can just summarize the key learnings.
Yeah, I think I'm going to probably just mention one that for me it's actually quite fundamental because it's about the mindset, right? So we've heard that some companies have treated for different reasons, right? The ESRS as a checklist. Yeah. So and that means that you go through the IG3 or you go through the text and you just go ticking and saying, where do I get the data? And this is something that I would say that it's not the purpose of what we are doing here. The purpose of what we are trying to do with the ESRS is actually find standardized ways, a standardized way even, where companies explain their sustainability journey and sustainability performance. So the company has to own the report, has to understand what are the dependencies, what's the relationship between impacts and risks, needs to actually put into paper what it is exactly that they are spending their time on. So what are the types of issues that the board discusses? Where are they investing time and effort for processes and controls? Where do they spend their time on engagement? So it's actually understanding that it's your story and the framework is basically the way to explain it, but the story is yours, the metrics are yours. So it's owning that piece of the ESRS reporting, because at the end of the day, it's a communication tool. So what we are trying to say as well now is that this is not about companies putting a library of codes of conducts, engagement surveys or policies that they have. It's not that. I mean, putting all this information under the ESRS report without a clear objective of what you're trying to say will obscure the real information that the investor needs. So it's actually sitting down in the drawing board. It may not happen in year 1, it may not happen in year 2, probably in year 3, and understand what you're trying to tell, and then work backwards. And obviously, it has to be compliant with the ESRS. There's no doubt about that. That's what regulation is here for. But it's actually owning that regulation and trying to explain that in your own words, ensuring that you are covering the mandatory pieces. So it's a bit of a change of mindset. It's you driving the reporting, using the ESRS as the tool, not ESRS as being the end, but rather the means.
Yeah, well said. Exactly, using it as the means. Yeah, wonderful. I think that's really important to keep in mind, is to use it, to drive your strategy forward, and as a tool. Wonderful. Another question. I mean, so a major pillar of these revisions has been around, burden reduction, simplification. Beyond just having fewer boxes to tick, what do you think are some advantages of the revised ESRS for those reporters who are already in scope and for reporters that will be in scope in 2027?
I think that for the ones in the scope is what I was just mentioning now, thinking back, is this, basically data? Can I put the data in such a way that it's a communication tool where I'm conveying the message better? For the ones that will be in a scope in 2027 or later, if the numbers change, I would say that they have an advantage. And it's like those, companies in Europe that, managed to avoid the first phase of the Industrial Revolution, and they went to the second one. The lessons learned are incredible.
Yeah.
You have examples of reports, in your sector, right? You are using a revised set, so there's less requirements, so you don't go through the whole investment of ESRS with more data points, and there's an education that has taken place within the investor community, within the users, and you're actually capturing all of that. So the trial and error that potentially 2024 ESRS reporters had to go through, you could avoid. So what can you do? To start going to the drawing board, going into what am I trying to say, and then work backwards. So I think that they're in an excellent position, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, lots of examples to look at, lots of things to drive from. And as you mentioned, I think that investor community, general public, customers, everybody, we're in a very different place where we were when, CSRD was first launched as to now and, 2027. So the audience has a much different understanding and knowledge on the topic. So absolutely. Wonderful. Okay, I think that we were going to jump now. I saw lots of questions in the chat, so I think we were jumping straight to the Q&A for the last few moments.
Yeah. So from the discussion we had with Gemma, we also see that it's similar. We have some key points here to focus on, which would be more also helping the discussion on the questions that the audience has put there. So Rajiv, please take it away.
Thank you so very much, Diksha. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Gemma. We have so many questions between the chat and the Q&A, so I'm going to try to group them together, and then I'm also going to let the audience know that we will follow up with responses to other questions. We have a few persons who asked questions anonymously. If you want us to respond to them after in follow-up, please let us know who you are, or you can reach out to us with the questions and we can always follow up. Gemma, I'm going to point this one to you. We have a few questions around XBRL tagging, around what we can expect with XBRL tagging, especially with updated requirements, if there are timelines for XBRL tagging. Can you speak a little bit about XBRL?
Sure. So XBRL tagging, this is about not only having we call it the twin ticks revolution in the sense of sustainability and digital reporting, right? So it's actually having the information in a data set that is directly consumable by investors, banks, right? So you have all the information in a way that you could add hundreds of companies and then do your credit ratings and evaluation. This is, as you can imagine, this has been issued, the XBRL tagging. It's with ESMA because ESMA has to actually issue the technical specifications, but it's on hold because there's going to be the revised ESRS. So again, it takes a while. It's not going to be ready for 2026. We need to look at the timeline, whether it will be ready for 2027. But I thought that the other question also that I saw in the chat in relation to that is about this IG3, right? So when will it be available? Well, IG3 again, does it make sense that we issue it now, or we wait until half a year when we're going to have the delegated act and it will be all packaged together? So that's what we are aiming at. We are aiming at waiting to get these delegated act. As you can imagine, we do have some draft IG3 because we've done all the calculations on data points. So that's based on the IG3 as we know it. But we will issue that and do a public consultation or a 1 month public input once the delegated act is stable.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. As you're with EFRAG, we have one question that came in as well. When will the EFRAG guidance documents be updated to help with interpretation of the new ESRS standards? Is there a timeline you can share with us?
Sure. So I think that's a very good question, and it's also a very good question for us. We are now under a new landscape in terms of companies in the scope. So we have the companies that have applied ESRS for 2 years now. We have companies that will drop off of the ESRS, companies that will come in 2027, and we also have, this new cohort of companies between 250 and 1,000 employees. So what we are doing now with the board is actually establishing what is the most effective mechanism. Should we continue updating the IG? Does it make sense to actually update the IG1 for the companies that have been running materiality assessment for 2 years? Or we should focus the materiality assessment for the guidance for the new reporters in 2027. So these are the sort of questions that we are asking ourselves. And we are ready to launch an agenda public consultation in a few months, whereby we are hoping to get a lot of responses like we're used to, which is fantastic engagement, I have to say, from all of you about what are the topics where this implementation guidance would be helpful. Yeah, so this is something that it's coming.
Perfect. Thank you so very much, Gemma. We're at time, and I really want to be respectful of everyone's time. We've had quite a few participants join. We are going to follow up with the answers to the other questions that we may not have gotten to during the webinar. But I want to say thank you to our presenters, Diksha, Alicia, Gemma. Thank you so very much for carving out time to share what is a very, very vast topic with our audience in just under 45 minutes. We know we can probably spend hours going through the updates and what companies can do to prepare, but I just want to say thanks for summarizing it and sharing it with the audience. For those who have registered but were unable to join, and those who have joined, we will be sharing the recording after, and we will follow up with responses to your questions to keep the conversation going. So thank you so very much, everyone, wherever you dialed in from around the world. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everybody.